Happy to join the Earth Day 2024 virtual stage. I'm Jacob Simon, a climate educator and creator, a former internationally ranked Team USA figure skater, and the creator of Jacob Simon Says, which is a platform telling positive stories to replace dread with hope while sparking effective action. I essentially educate and motivate my audience of over 500,000 people across social media, which is at Jacob Simon Says, and a newsletter to overcome eco anxiety and to get involved with tackling the climate crisis through optimism and action. And I live in Brooklyn, have the fortune to spread hope to many millions of people taking individual actions. And I've had some amazing and impactful partners in the environmental world doing really inspiring work that I get to just walk around New York City and talk about. And now I get to talk to another inspiring person, Jeremy, and have a conversation, ask a few questions to learn about what greatness you are working on. So, Jeremy, a true pleasure to meet you. Can you introduce yourself, and then we'll
Sure.
get to a few questions.
Yeah. Thank you, Jacob. I'm happy to be here. And my name is Jeremy Lang. I'm one of the founders of a company called Lomi, and we are on a mission to create a waste-free future. So we're trying to keep 10 billion pounds of waste out of the landfill every year with a focus on food waste. And we're doing that by creating, smart waste appliances that help make it as easy as possible for people to keep food waste out of the landfill and get it back into the soil where it belongs.
Amazing. So, what's with the food waste problem? Can you tell me a little bit
Yeah,
about it and what actually happens when typically food waste would end up in a landfill?
you bet. So I think the key thing to think about is food waste is not waste. Food waste is a very valuable, precious natural resource. And the worst thing we can do is put it in the landfill. When it goes in landfill, it creates methane. And actually, food waste, if it was a country, would be the third largest emitter of methane gas emissions in the world. So it's a big deal. And it's by putting it in the landfill, it's very wasteful because it's supposed to go back to the soil. That's nature's fertilizer. So we strip, we take all the crops off the field, and then the food scraps are going into the landfill to create methane gas when it can be used as a natural fertilizer. So that's what we're trying to do to make it as easy as possible to, circular organics, use natural fertilizer. It's in the United States alone, just to give you some ideas of numbers. So it's about 120 billion pounds of food scraps, food waste are generated every year and end up in landfill. And only about 7 billion pounds are actually composted and get back in the soil. So on a mass balance, it's actually ridiculous. We're taking everything, all this natural fertilizer, and we're putting it in the landfill. And then we're creating a synthetic fertilizer, 60, 70 billion pounds, and putting it back in the soil. So the soil is starving for organic matter, and food scraps are nature's fertilizer. So like I said, we're just trying to make it as easy as possible for people to do their part and realize that, hey, this does not belong in the landfill. It needs to get back into the soil to help regenerate the soil.
Wow, 120 billion pounds is almost unfathomable.
It's
That's massive.
crazy. Yeah, it's a lot. It's food waste in landfill. It's roughly, anywhere from about 40% of your garbage is organics that can go back to the earth. So, and should be kept out of the landfill. So the compost industry is, doing an amazing job of trying to keep that out of the landfill. And, unfortunately, it's less than 10% of all households in the United States have access to green bin programs that collect food scraps and organics. So we're trying to really help to decentralize and democratize waste management and create a hybrid model where the individual households can really help to tackle and handle and process their food scraps and get it into a form where it can go to a compost facility way more efficiently. So less trucks on the road. When we put it in these smart waste appliances, it reduces the weight by about 80% and the volume. And it's a dry material that can be, instead of having a truck come every week to pick up your organics, you can have it come every 2 months. And it's a lot less contaminated and it's a cleaner form. It can be used as a compost feedstock, or it can go directly into the soil as a natural fertilizer.
Cool. So to back up a little bit, you mentioned the
Hmm.
green bins program. So living in New York, we have some composting infrastructure. I believe our bins are brown. There aren't
Could be
any in
brown.
my
So
local area,
yes.
but Well, yeah,
organic
tell me a
stream.
little bit about that and maybe how it works, how much is actually recycled or composted.
Sure. Yeah. So like when I said that 120 billion pounds of food scrap going to landfill, about 7 billion pounds is actually composted and kept out of the landfill. So some of it goes to anaerobic digesters to generate energy, but the bulk of it is still ending up in landfill. And a lot of cities are starting to have organics waste collection programs, so your brown bin or your green bin, and that a lot of them focus on yard waste. And food waste is something that's it's harder to get. It's harder to get people to scrape their plates off and separate it, and it's kind of smelly and gross. And um, so it's something that like I said, we're trying to really tackle the food waste side of it to make it easier for people to, do their part, keep food scraps out of the landfill, get into a form where you can get it back into the soil and help to regenerate the soil and grow healthy plants.
Totally. Yeah, that's fantastic. And obviously Lomi is helping to fight this food waste problem and in turn fight climate change. I'm curious how Lomi is actually achieving that. And also, is the biggest barrier to composting education? Is it that it's complicated to do, or like how do you feel Lomi is kind of addressing that barrier?
Yeah, I think it's a little of both. And it's not easy, it takes time, but it's very rewarding. And so if, we always say there are there are a number of ways to recycle your food scraps. Composting is one great way, like or feed it to your chickens or, start your own home compost or send it to a community composter. Or you can put it in these smart waste appliances like Lomi, like I said, that just makes that whole thing easier. But just to get it back in the average household in the United States it's about 2.5 pounds of food scraps, food waste every day. So that's almost 1,000 pounds a year that's going to landfill. And that's how you get that 120 billion pounds, just based on the number of households in the United States. So it's the other neat thing about Lomi, it's a big deal, but once you start doing it, it's a daily habit that, every day we scrape our food scraps instead of going into the garbage or into a little smaller green bin that smells and is gross kind of and hard to do. We put it into our Lomi, push the button, and overnight, in like 3 to 5 hours, you can see that it creates like this, we call it Lomi Earth, but it's dehydrated food scraps. And it's just the visual scene to believe is very, it makes you feel really good, and it's empowering that, hey, I am making a difference. I can see my food scraps decreasing. It's almost, I think we're at the point where we get to recycling. We talk about recycling plastics when we put it in the green bins or the recycling bin. We're like, is this really going to get recycled? Because we know that like less than 10% of plastic gets recycled. What's really neat, and we're hearing from our customers, is when you see it to believe it, like when you see your food scraps decreasing and when you can spread it on your lawn or put it in your garden or send it to your community compost or go into your organics waste collection bin, it's something that's really sticky, and it's something that people do every day. And we also developed a program where we can measure, and it's a connected device, so we can reward you for how much you use it and incentivize you. So it's just to really promote those change it. It's not really completely changing your habit. It's just making one more step in your day that makes it easier to try and do something better for the planet.
Yeah, and that reward system's fun. Anything with like a gamification, I'm sold.
Yes.
So
Yeah.
yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And I know what you mean where you put something in a bin and then it's out of sight, out of mind. And for
Hmm.
me, living in New York, I collect my food scraps in like a little Tupperware in my freezer.
Yes.
And then I go to my farmer's market every Saturday and I kind of drop it off in these big community compost bins. And then it's off somewhere. I believe it's a Governor's Island where they process it into compost. But it's interesting because yeah, it's not that much harder to just put it in this Tupperware. It's not harder at all to just scrape it into
Right.
this Tupperware bin and put it in my freezer instead of the garbage can. Obviously, I could see the Lomi right next to you. It looks quite small,
Yeah. It's not
compact,
very
and I'm
big.
sure
Yeah.
even for my small New York apartment, I'm sure there's room for it.
Yes.
And how does it actually work? Like, what is the mechanism that's creating the Lomi Earth? I think you called it.
Yeah, we call it Lomi Earth. It's basically we mix it, we heat it, we control the humidity in it. And so it's basically speeding up nature by adding energy. So, I always give the analogy when an apple falls to the ground in nature, it might take maybe a year or months to fully break down and, to go back to the earth. If you have more energy and you put it in a compost pile where there's heat and you're mixing it, that's more energy. It might take weeks kind of thing. So we're just same thing. We put it in Lomi, we're speeding, accelerating that process and getting it to a form that's easier to handle, doesn't smell. Like I said, it decreases the weight and the volume. So it's less trucks on the road. So for example, instead of putting it into your deep freeze, the frozen food, you could put it in Lomi and, you could probably collect it for, some of the big brown bins that you talk about, like the organics waste collection bins. We've had customers who they keep their end product, their Lomi Earth for a year, and it fills one of those bins. So instead of it being picked up, like I said, every week or every 2 weeks, it could be picked up once a week. And instead of having all these trucks on the road going to a transfer station and then going to a compost facility far away, it just really can make that whole process a lot more efficient for everyone involved.
Totally. Yeah. And it makes sense to fit as much as you can onto a single truckload to, of course, save emissions and everything, save weight.
Mm-hmm.
And your freezer has limited space. So
That's right.
I can speak from firsthand experience. When half my freezer is full of food scraps instead of food I want to eat, it's a struggle sometimes.
Yeah, exactly.
That's so cool, kind of mimicking Earth or mimicking nature and speeding it up.
Oh, you nailed
Did
it. Yeah.
you study like nature's processes to figure out how to do that? I love learning things like
Yeah.
this, and
I
it's so
actually,
fascinating to me.
it's so funny. I have a Bachelor of Science in Agriculture. And so sustainability and that whole, it's really neat how that's starting to come around again. And like just how the soil is like alive and it's so complicated and so many microorganisms and what's happening there. But like if the soil dies, we all die basically. So we really got to take care of it. And there's some studies that suggest, because we're pulling everything out of the soil to grow these crops and then putting it into the landfill, instead of that apple or whatever going back to the earth to fertilize the trees and the plant, like that type of thing. We're stripping all the organic matter out of the soil, and we only have so many years that we can actually do that before the soil's like, well, I can't, we can't grow crops anymore because there's no organic matter, there's no nutrients in it. So that's so I use that. It's neat. It's going back to the like soil microbiology and just soil fertility and all of that. So but yeah, but what's neat is when we talked about nature and mimicking nature, there is no waste in nature, right? Humans are the only species that create waste. So we're trying to get as close to nature as possible. And like we also talk about like, what if garbage was optional? What if everything you consumed, from your food scraps to your food containers to your shirts, whatever, could all go back to the earth, circular? Like, we started with plastic, we started tackling the plastic problem by developing compostable plastics that can go back to the earth. But plastic, when you think about it, is, it's an amazing material, but it just keeps building and building and going in a linear progression. And the end of life, we have to figure out how to manage that. So like it's the opposite of nature. So it's all about helping nature along, mimicking nature, making it as easy as possible to, like I said, recycle these valuable materials.
I love that. Yeah, let's definitely make waste optional. That sounds fantastic. And obviously, it's up to people like us consumers to do that, and also up to you to invent the solution so we can change the systems that we're in and enable people to even have that possibility. That is super awesome. How can people, eliminate food waste in their own lives?
Well, it gets back to just be, I think, aware of how much food you're buying and what's going in the garbage and what aren't you eating. I think it's buy local if possible instead of buying something that has to be shipped around the world to get to you. That creates a lot of greenhouse gas emissions along the way. I think it's roughly half the food that's grown does not get eaten in the world. Like think about how wasteful that is. So yeah, and eat your leftovers. That type of thing. And if you do have food scraps, try to get that back into the soil in one form or another through, like we said, through composting, home composting, industrial composting, your community compost, your community garden. Look at these smart waste appliances that can help you get it to a form that can go back right into the soil, or make it more efficient. So yeah, there are many things you can do. I think just being aware of it. And the thing that really clicked for me is when we talked about food waste, we got to stop calling it waste. It's not waste. Like I said, it's a valuable natural resource. It's nature's fertilizer, right? There's never been a need. Nature did not need synthetic fertilizers because everything just worked in cycles. So until So if we can get everything back into the soil, regenerate the soil, it's a huge thing. Healthy topsoil helps sequester carbon out of the atmosphere, right? Even more so than trees do. So it's just really, really important for us to all, focus on that. And it's fun and it's easy. It's something that, you can really visually see. It's rewarding when, we hear people who are, yeah, I've grown the largest tomatoes I've ever grown this year, or carrots. And just by using my own food scraps and getting it back into the soil.
That is really cool. And it's such an interconnected web. Everything
It
relates.
is.
And the more you learn about it, the more you realize that it's all just one ever flowing kind of being. And
Mm-hmm.
for sure, I like that. It's not food waste. It's a resource. Food scraps as a resource. That's great. And also leftovers are great. You don't have to cook again. Like they
That's
taste
right.
just as
Jeez.
good. Come on. I
Yes.
never understood why people couldn't get behind leftovers. So keep
Yeah.
them in the front of your fridge and you'll remember to eat them.
And a time saver too. You don't have to prepare this big meal and
Exactly. It's a
right?
win-win. It's just like
Yeah,
meal prepping, but like accidental meal prepping. It's
exactly.
fantastic.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much, Jeremy. This is a really, really cool conversation. Thanks for talking about Lomi and everything and how we can reduce our food waste in our own lives. Let's all do it.
Awesome.
And we can also head to earthdayinitiative.org for more information on this topic, on a bunch of related environmental topics as well. And yeah, it's such a pleasure to meet you. Excited to see what's
Thank
next.
you. Great meeting you too. Keep up the good work.
Thank you.
Thanks.